Welcome to Death Kiss Traveler. Today we are stepping under the big top. But instead of wonder and laughter, this circus ended in chaos, flames, and heartbreak. It remains one of the deadliest tragedies in American history. I'm Marissa, your morbidly curious host. And if you are drawn to these haunting stories, don't forget to subscribe, leave a 5-star review, or share this podcast with friends. And follow along at Death Kiss Traveler Podcast on TikTok and Instagram. Today's episode may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised. The American circus wasn't just born. It erupted out of an age of railroads, restless crowds, and a hunger for spectacle. It began with two rival dreamers, each determined to outdo the other. And together, they built an empire that would come to define wonder itself. Phineas Taylor Barnum was no stranger to attention. In the 19th century, he turned oddities into attractions. General Tom Thumb, the infamous Fiji mermaid, and his ever-growing collection of human curiosities and exotic beasts. But in 1871, Barnum raised the stakes. He unleashed a traveling spectacle the world had never seen, a portable city of wonders, part circus, part zoo, part theater that rolled into towns and swallowed them whole. His only true rival was James Anthony Bailey, a master showman with a sharp eye for scale and ambition. In 1881, Barnum and Bailey joined forces, launching the greatest show on earth. Their innovation? They moved their empire by rail. Entire trains painted in bold colors, carrying elephants, lions, acrobats, and freak shows, thundered into towns like rolling billboards of marvel and mystery. When the circus came to town, it announced itself. The star of the empire was Jumbo the elephant, a towering colossus brought from the London Zoo in 1882, advertised as the largest elephant on Earth. Jumbo became a household name, a living symbol of Barnum's belief that bigger was always better. But when Barnum died in 1891, Bailey carried the torch until his own death in 1906. And waiting in the wings were 6 ambitious brothers from Baraboo, Wisconsin, the Ringlings. They had started small, with wagons and musical acts, selling family-friendly fun at prices nearly everyone could afford. But soon their own circus grew to rival Barnum and Bailey. When Bailey passed, the Ringlings pounced, purchasing the Barnum and Bailey show in 1907 for the modern equivalent of nearly $14 million. For over a decade, they ran the two circuses separately, until the trials of World War I forced a merger. In 1919, the giants fused at last. The Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey combined shows were born, a towering spectacle unlike anything the world had seen before. It was the greatest show on earth, and for generations, it ruled American entertainment. The combined circus was a marvel of logistics and showmanship. It traveled by train, arriving in each town like a conquering army of entertainment. Crews erected massive tents, sometimes seating more than 10,000, and they paraded through the streets to announce their arrival. Children pressed their noses to dusty windows, and farmers abandoned their plows just to catch a sight of the grand parade. Marching bands blaring, gilded wagons glittering, elephants lumbering in line, and costume performers waving as though royalty had arrived. Inside the big top, the magic only deepened. The 3-ring format meant that the senses were constantly overwhelmed. In one ring, trapeze artists hurled themselves through the air, catching one another with impossible grace. In the next, lions roared as their trainer coaxed them through flaming hoops, while elsewhere, elephants beckoned in sequined headdresses, lifting performers high upon their trunks. Between acts, brass bands would erupt into lively marches, ensuring there was never a moment of silence, never a chance for the crowd to look away. Beyond the main tent, sideshows lured the curious with banners promising marvels of nature and wonder. Here, visitors encountered sword swallowers, bearded ladies, and men who claimed to be half the size of ordinary folk. For small-town America, where daily life meant fields, chores, and repetition, the circus was a dazzling eruption of the exotic and the impossible. By the late 19th and early 20th century, Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey had become more than entertainment. It was a ritual, a cultural holiday. Towns planned for weeks in advance, schools sometimes closing on circus day, whole families piling into horse-drawn wagons to stake out their place in line. For many, this was their first glimpse of the wider world, of Asia through elephants and tigers, of Europe through acrobats, of mystery itself through illusions and sideshow curiosities. The circus wasn't just a show, it was an event that stretched the imagination, leaving behind a lingering sense that the world was bigger, stranger, and far more magical than the dusty streets they called home. On a warm summer afternoon, on July 6, 1944, the circus had come to town at the Barber Street Fairgrounds in Hartford, Connecticut. The tent was set up on a grass field near Wish Elementary School. 7,000 men and women dressed in their best suits and dresses. Boys in clean short-sleeved shirts with slicked hair. Girls with ribboned braids swinging down their backs. The townspeople slowly shuffled into an enormous circus tent, about 200 feet wide and 450 feet long, holding bleachers, animal cages, and 3 rings. The smell of popcorn, sawdust, and hot canvas baking under the summer sun. The big top towers over the crowd like a striped cathedral, its ropes humming slightly in the warm breeze. The tent's capacity was 9,000. The 7,000 guests were more than enough to fill the arena, though. I love studying these old circus photos. The men were in their best suits and hats, the women in long dresses and carefully pinned hair. It's almost impossible to imagine the heat they endured packed shoulder to shoulder beneath a sweltering canvas tent in the height of summer. The air must have been thick and stifling, yet appearance mattered. The circus was a grand occasion, and for one dazzling day, everyone wanted to look their very best. I am going to post these photos on TikTok and Instagram. Go ahead and check them out. They're absolutely incredible. The yellowed canvas roof stretched high above, glowing faintly as the sunlight filters through. The fabric, heavy with a mixture of gasoline and paraffin wax, meant to keep out rain, holds an invisible danger no one suspects. The lights dim under the canopy. Clowns tumble across the sawdust floor, their painted grins wide and exaggerated, while acrobats took sweeping bows. Bareback riders galloped in a blur of sequins, feathers, and dust, their horses snorting and stampeding in perfect rhythm to the brass band's booming march. Then came the animals. A ripple of anticipation moved through the crowd as steel bars were locked into place at the center ring. From the shadows, lions padded into the arena, their golden coats gleaming under the hot white glare of the spotlights. Their low growls rumbled through the tent, a sound that sent shivers down spines. And then stepping forward with whip in hand came Clyde Beatty. Beatty was no ordinary circus man. Known across America as the world's greatest wild animal trainer, he had built his reputation in the 1920s and 30s by doing what few others dared, entering the cage with not one, but a dozen big cats at a time. He was tall, lean, and always dressed in crisp white, a figure of calm against the restless, prowling predators. The audience adored him because he had turned fear into theater. With a flick of his whip and a sharp crack of his pistol, he brought the lions to heel, commanding them to leap onto pedestals, roll on the ground, or rear up and roar on cue. Each snarl, each swipe of a claw sent the crowd into gasps before dissolving into cheers. Children clutched their parents' arms, mothers held their breaths. Beatty, cool and composed, was the master of chaos, dancing on the edge of danger. And when the last lion was finally led from the cage, the tension broke. The band struck up a jaunty new tune, the tempo quick and playful. The clowns tumbled back into the ring, spraying seltzer bottles into the crowd, tossing confetti so the air seemed to fill with glitter and snow. Laughter rolled through the stands, the fear of the lions now replaced by joy and delight. The big top was alive, its atmosphere electric, every pair of eyes dazzled by the rhythm of danger and relief. But while the crowd's attention was fixed on the performers, at the southwest edge of the tent, a tiny flame flicked upward against the canvas wall. Almost invisible at first, it flickered and danced, unnoticed by thousands of spectators whose eyes were still locked on the ring. At first, no one noticed. The little flame clung stubbornly to the canvas wall, so small it could have been mistaken for a lantern's glow. The circus band played on, the brass horns blaring above the laughter, and the clowns continued their antics at the center ring. But the fire was hungry, fed by the paraffin wax and gasoline mixture that waterproofed the canvas. A few sharp-eyed spectators pointed, their voices rising in confusion. "Fire!" one man shouted. But his warning was drowned out by the music and the roar of the crowd. Within seconds, the fire shot to the ceiling, spreading faster than the human eye could follow. Panic rippled through the stands. Mothers clutched their children. Fathers leapt to their feet. Benches toppled. The orderly circus spectacle dissolved into chaos as people surged toward the exits. But the tent, packed with nearly 7,000 souls, had only a few narrow passageways out, each quickly clogged with desperate bodies. Inside the ring, Clyde Beatty froze. He had faced roaring lions, snapping tigers, the very embodiment of danger. But this was something else, something he could not control with a whip or a pistol crack. Performers dropped their props and scattered. The fire did not discriminate. As the flames raced across the canvas, the circus animals who had been the centerpiece of the show only moments before were suddenly trapped in the same chaos as the crowd. The great elephants trumpeted in terror as smoke filled their trunks. Handlers shouted and yanked their leads, trying to guide them through the narrow chutes. Some managed to lumber out into the open air, their massive bodies shoving aside fences and wagons, while others turned in confused circles, nearly crushing the men trying to save them. Later accounts told of elephants who broke free and charged towards the river to escape the smoke, their cries echoing through the streets of Hartford long after the fire. The big cats, lions and tigers, had already been caged when the fire began. Their steel enclosures meant to protect the crowd now became their tombs. Witnesses recalled hearing the animals roar and thrash as flames closed in, the sound carrying above the screams of people. Trainers tried desperately to reach them, but the fire spread too quickly. Many of the cats perished in their cages. The animals weren't spared. Dogs from clown acts, monkeys in glittering costumes, even trained bears, were caught in the inferno. The fire was no longer a flicker. It was a monster, roaring through the big top like a freight train of heat and fury. Canvas and wood exploded into flame, Burning fabric fell from above, pinning some to the dirt floor, while others clawed their way beneath the collapsing poles. The air itself turned deadly, thick with choking smoke and the sharp chemical sting of melting paraffin that seared the lungs and blinded their eyes. Knives flashed as workers and guests ripped at the canvas walls, carving ragged holes for escape. Parents shoved their children through the tears, hoisting them toward the safety as flames scorched their backs. One young mother threw her baby into the waiting hands outside, then collapsed before she could follow. The child lived. She did not. In the chaos, a boyish elephant handler grabbed a little girl, lifted her high, and set her on the back of a trembling giant he had raised from a calf. Together they staggered through smoke and falling fire until the beast pushed the girl beyond the wall of flame. The elephant and the girl lived. The young handler did not. Two clowns, painted faces streaked with soot and sweat, became unlikely heroes. Just minutes before, they had been tumbling for laughs. Now they pulled children by the hands, shouting over the inferno, guiding families through the aisles collapsing in fire. Mothers covered their children's faces with their dresses. Strangers carried the lost. And above it all, the fire raged louder than anything. One father remembered lifting his daughter over his head, trying to pass her down to strangers closer to the aisle. Quote, "She was crying so hard. I just shouted, 'Take her, take her.' I never saw who carried her out. I didn't even know if she made it until hours later at the hospital." End quote. The burns were unspeakable. Men and women staggered from the collapsing tent with their hair and clothes ablaze, skin blackened or peeling in sheets. Some dropped and rolled on the grass, choking on smoke. Others ran blindly, leaving fiery trails behind them. At the top of the bleachers, the choice was cruel: wait for the flames or leap. With stairways clogged and the fire raining from above, many jumped. Some crawled away with broken bones. Others never rose again, pinned under collapsing poles and flaming canvas. The narrow exits trapped hundreds, forcing some to climb over others. Entire families were pinned together beneath the falling poles or the canvas, reduced to smoldering heaps. Survivors described tripping over bodies, stepping on charred limbs as they scrambled to escape. It only took 10 minutes. 10 minutes for thousands of lives to splinter forever. When the flames finally starved themselves out, silence hung over the fairgrounds like a funeral veil. The great big top, once bursting with brass music and laughter, was reduced to a skeleton of blackened poles. Smoke curled into the summer sky, heavy with the stench of ash, canvas, and flesh. Survivors stumbled through the wreckage in shock. Faces gray with soot, eyes vacant, clothes burned to rags. Barefoot, their skin blistered from the scorched earth. Some clutched their children, limp in their arms, curls singed to ash. Others dragged the living by the hand, whispering empty reassurances through soot-streaked tears. Everywhere, voices cried into the smoke. Mothers calling for sons, fathers for daughters. Sometimes there was an answer. More often there was not. Many victims were burned beyond recognition. Some victims suffered burns so severe that internal organs were exposed, while others were trapped long enough for their flesh to burn to the bone. Eyewitnesses described children whose hair and clothing had been completely incinerated, leaving only skeletal frames. The fire had charred skin so badly that teeth, jewelry, or other small personal items were sometimes the only way to identify victims. In the days that followed, the city was overwhelmed. Hospitals spilled into hallways, every bed occupied by the burned and the broken. The morgues, too. They were full, lined with bodies so charred they were scarcely human. The fire claimed 168 lives that day. The exact toll of the Hartford Circus Fire will never be fully known. So many of the bodies were burned beyond recognition that precise numbers blurred into estimates. But historians agree on one grim truth. The vast majority of the dead were children. Of the 168 lives lost, as many as 120 boys and girls who had come to the circus for an afternoon of wonder had perished in the fire. 30 to 40 women and perhaps a dozen men had also died in the fire. Families had filled the seats beneath the big top, and families bore the brunt of this tragedy. Beyond the dead, more than 700 people suffered grievous injuries. Skin seared by flames, bones shattered from desperate leaps, lungs scarred by smoke. Thousands more carried lesser burns, bruises, or the invisible wounds of terror that never truly healed. How could it have happened? Eyewitnesses later recalled different possibilities. Some whispered it was a cigarette, carelessly discarded. Others blamed faulty lighting or electrical equipment. Whatever the cause, the flame met the waxed, gasoline-coated canvas, and it exploded in an instant. The big top's soaring roof trapped smoke and heat, turning the fire into a roaring chimney that sucked oxygen in and pushed the flames across the canvas with terrifying speed. The fire had fed on everything: canvas, ropes, sawdust, wax, people, turning the greatest show on Earth into one of the deadliest disasters in American history. Investigators would never pinpoint the exact ignition, but they concluded that the deadly combination of carelessness, flammable materials, and overcrowding made the catastrophe nearly inevitable once that first spark caught. What had promised laughter and wonder became horror and loss in an instant. I can't tell the story of the Hartford Circus Fire without speaking of Little Miss 1565. She was a little girl, no more than 8 or 9, pulled from the ashes with burns so severe that no one could say for certain who she was. Her face, though scarred by fire, was eerily serene, almost as if she were sleeping. When the coroner cataloged her body, she was assigned a number: 1,565. A sterile tag meant for record keeping, yet it became the name by which she would be remembered forever. For weeks, Hartford newspaper printed her photograph, pleading for anyone to recognize her. Thousands stared at her face. Hundreds came forward claiming to know her, but no identification ever matched. Some said she had come from Massachusetts. Others swore she was the child of traveling circus workers. One theory suggests she had arrived with relatives who perished in the fire, leaving her alone, nameless and unclaimed. Her uncertainty only deepened the city's heartbreak. Parents who had lost children projected their sorrow onto her image. Strangers left flowers on her grave as though she belonged to them too. She became the nameless child of Hartford, a symbol of grief that could not be soothed. Little Miss 1565 was eventually buried at Northwood Cemetery. Her headstone was simple, a stark reminder of life cut tragically short, an identity forever unknown. Yet people continued to visit, leaving tokens of remembrance, flowers, dolls, small offerings. Children grew up hearing her story. Survivors of the fire whispered her number as if she was a ghost tethered to that day. Decades have passed, and her true identity still remains a mystery. Investigators and amateur sleuths revisited her case repeatedly. Some speculated she was Eleanor Emily Cook, a 6-year-old reported missing in the fire, though her family disputed it. Others believed she may have been traveling under another name, lost amidst the chaos in the disaster. The truth was never found, and yet in her absence of a name, she gained something more enduring. Memory. Little Miss 1565 came to embody all the children lost that day, the laughter that once filled the tent, and the silence that followed. Even now, she is remembered not merely as a victim, but as a symbol of innocence suspended in time, forever tied to the day the circus burned. In the shadows of Hartford's darkest afternoon, she became the face of a tragedy that refused to be forgotten. Hartford's mayor, William H. Mortensen, was not under the tent, but he was soon at the center of the city's response. Mortensen moved quickly, mobilizing police, firefighters, and doctors in what became one of Hartford's largest emergency efforts. He oversaw the grim task of turning schools and armories into makeshift morgues, while hospitals filled to capacity with the burned and the injured. In the weeks after the fire, the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus faced intense scrutiny. Investigators examined the canvas, narrowed exits, and the lack of fire safety. The tragedy forced circuses nationwide to rethink operations. Tents were rebuilt with fire-resistant materials. Exits widened, fire extinguishers became standard, and emergency drills were instituted. No precaution could bring back the lives lost, but organizers hoped future disasters could be prevented. Nearly 170 dead and hundreds injured, the family faced overwhelming grief, and the legal battle started. To provide quicker relief, an arbitration board was formed to distribute compensation fairly. Each claim was reviewed individually, factoring the victim's age, injuries, survival, and family circumstances, with hospital records, witness statements, and proof of identity guiding the decisions. Awards varied. Adults with dependents or severe injuries received more, while children's estates were smaller. Grace Jacobs Clark, who died after 18 days in the hospital and an amputation, received $8,000. Young children received $7,000. The board aimed to offer practical, fair compensation without long legal battles. While no amount could replace the lives lost, the awards provided families some measure of support amid the tragedy. The Hartford Circus Fire didn't just devastate a city. It changed the circus industry forever. What once had been seen as pure, dazzling entertainment was now forever shadowed by fear. Parents warned their children that the big top, with its glittering lights and soaring performers, could hide danger as easily as it revealed wonder. Some towns refused to host the circus for years, their fairgrounds haunted by the memory of the fire. The circus pressed on, bringing spectacle and joy to new cities. But the shadow of Hartford lingered. For performers and workers who survived, the fire remained a defining moment, a reminder of how quickly wonder could turn to tragedy. Parents warned children, towns hesitated to host the show, and the industry itself learned lessons in safety that would shape every big top thereafter. But the circus forever after held a dark reputation. I was talking with my dad about the Hartford Circus Fire. He was born in the 1960s, and he said he was never allowed to go to the circus as a child. His parents had been terrified of a fire happening again, even though they lived on the other side of the country. For them, the memory of that tragedy was so strong that the circus, for all its magic and spectacle, had become a place of danger in their minds. They didn't go to the circus. The end of the circus came decades later, not with flames, but with time. Changing public tastes, rising costs, and growing concern over animal treatment meant that the greatest show on earth could no longer thrive as it once had. In May of 2017, after 146 years of touring, Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey closed the door for the last time. The performers moved on. Smaller circuses carried on fragments of the tradition, and museums like the Ringling Museum in Sarasota, Florida, now preserves the legacy of the circus, including its triumphs and its tragedies. Today, the site of the Hartford Circus Fire is a quiet, stark contrast to the chaos that summer afternoon in 1944. Behind the former Wish School on Barber Street, a memorial marks where the Big Top once stood. The center ring, once filled with trapeze artists, elephants, and lions, is now a silent reminder of the nearly 170 lives lost. Bronze plaques trace the fire's path, and the names of the victims are etched in memory, ensuring they are never forgotten. Visitors followed a path around the north side of the school to a space of reflection and mourning, honoring children, parents, and circus workers alike. Nearby, at Northwood Cemetery, a simple marker commemorates 6 victims whose identities were never confirmed, reading, "Their identity known but to God." These memorials scattered across Hartford preserve the memory of courage, innocence, and tragedy. Decades later, they still draw visitors to remember, reflect, and honor those who extinguished the fire beneath the Big Top. I wish I could share the stories of all 168 people that died that day. They were all beautiful souls, and their stories deserve to be told. If you want to learn more about them, the website circusfire1944.com has each one in detail. Here are several victims' stories that caught my attention and broke my heart. Helen Bradley was born in 1909 to Lithuanian immigrants in New Britain. She went to the Hartford Circus with her husband Frank and their 2 daughters Irene and Helen. When the fire broke out, the girls managed to escape, but their parents rushed back inside the burning tent to search for them. Neither Helen nor Frank survived. Their bodies were later identified at the State Armory by Helen's sister Mary. Frank was a founding member of the Volunteer Fire Company, and he is remembered with a monument at that firehouse today. Helen and Frank were laid to rest next to each other at St. Bernard's Cemetery in Tariffville. The Bradleys' daughters lived on without their parents. Carrying the memory of that day meant for joy that turned into an unspeakable loss. Mrs. Bradley's estate was awarded $13,500 by the arbitration board. Frederick K. Boyajian Jr. was born October 30th, 1938, in Hartford, Connecticut. He was found injured at the circus grounds on July 6th and later died at the municipal hospital. He was 5 years old. His mother Alice and his brother Stephen also perished in the fire. The 3 were laid to rest at Fairview Cemetery in West Hartford. Frederick was survived by his father Frederick Sr. and infant brother Norman. His estate was awarded $6,500 by the arbitration board. Loretta Ruth Dillis was just 7 years old, a bright second grader at Elmwood Elementary School in West Hartford. Born in 1936 to George and Anna Dillis, she was an only child, the center of her parents' world. Loretta went to the circus with her mother. When the fire swept through the Big Top, Loretta and her mother never made it out. Both were later found among the victims. Loretta's remains, recorded as body 1542, was identified at the State Armory the next day by her dentist. She was laid to rest at St. Catherine's Cemetery in Broadbrook. Loretta's father, George, was left to grieve his wife and his only child. Her estate was later awarded $7,000 in arbitration. Grace Jacobs Clark of Hartford was born on October 4th, 1895. The daughter of Emily and Edward Clark, she was 48 years old. She attended the circus with her parents, unaware that it would be the very last day they would ever spend together. When the fire tore through the tent, Grace was found alive but critically injured. Rushed to Municipal Hospital, she endured nearly 3 weeks of intensive care. Despite the amputation of her right leg and every effort to save her, she succumbed to her injuries in the early morning hours of July 24th. Grace's parents both perished in the circus grounds that day. Grace would not leave her elderly parents behind. She desperately tried to save them, and in turn she lost her own life. She was known for her music. Grace served as an organist at the Danish Lutheran Church and was a devoted member of the Church of the Good Shepherd. Her estate was awarded $8,000 by the arbitration board. Each week, I get pulled to another unique story. I feel like these stories find me. Even before starting this podcast, I was pulled toward these stories. So to end each episode, I'm going to give my final thought on each one. The Hartford Circus Fire ended in smoke and ashes, but its story cannot be allowed to fade into history. Have you ever heard of it? Did you know the full details if you had? I didn't. I may have heard about it years ago, then never thought about it again. Until now. I'll be sharing those photos on Instagram and TikTok. They are both breathtaking and absolutely heartbreaking. The sheer speed of the inferno engulfing the tent in just 10 minutes is almost unimaginable. As a mom myself, my heart aches for the parents who wandered the grounds for hours, searching for their children only to stumble through makeshift morgues lined with tiny bodies, praying they don't see their child, but knowing they will. Seeing families devastated, multiple members lost in a single fire is chilling. There are last names that are repeated over and over and over, and I felt the weight of that unimaginable grief for those families. And the little girl that no one claimed, did they not know she was there? Were her parents lost in the fire? Her story is fascinating with all the unknowns and the what-ifs. The Hartford Circus Fire may have ended decades ago, but its story needs to live on. By remembering the victims, the children, the parents, and the performers, we honor their lives and ensure that this tragedy never fades into history. Thank you for listening to Death-Kissed Traveler. Next week, I bring you a ghost story like you've never heard before. Follow me on Instagram or TikTok at Death-Kissed Traveler Podcast, and let's discuss these episodes together. Thinking of a vacation? Sun-Kissed Traveler will find you the best deals or that perfect relaxing resort you've been dreaming about. See show notes for link or visit sun-kissedtraveler.com. I'll see you next week.